I see this work that we're all here to explore as a call to create any project, any conversation, any organization as a practice ground for a more thrivable world. That whatever sector we're in, whatever industry, whatever the nature of our project, the foundational purpose is to cultivate the fertile conditions for life to be able to thrive. I posted something on LinkedIn and Facebook a couple of days ago. There's a phrase that gets thrown around that we need to give back more than we take, and that's regeneration. That's what somebody had posted. And another is regenerative tourism in particular likes to say it means leaving a place better than you found it. And I find both of those kind of dangerously simple. If I leave a place better than I found it, maybe that means I pick up one piece of trash and then I'm done. And that's a nice thing. I should do that, but it's not all that's needed. And it's not all that's possible. And the give back more than I take is dangerously transactional. I give, you take. It doesn't question why I took so much to begin with, that now I need to give back. It doesn't invite the full scope of thinking and behavior that's really needed. And so what I posted about was this concept that I love from an organization called Organization Unbound, that is the concept of the giving field, of a space that we create together, of an emergent property we create together, in which everyone feels that they get more than they give. It's almost the opposite. Everyone feels that they get more than they give. And the linear mechanistic story would say that's impossible. If I get more than I give, you must be giving more than you get, because it's a zero sum, right? We have to balance somehow. But life doesn't work that way. Life is generous and generative. So what we want is to cultivate the generative capacity of the system that we form together, the system that we're part of. This is the work of regeneration and of thrivability for all of our projects, right? So here's the first framework I want to share. This is how I think of the capacities we have to develop if we are to grow the capacity of the systems we're part of to be generative in that way, to be a giving field in which more is possible and we're each nourished even as we contribute. So this is not necessarily a linear progression. There's a real cycling through each of these and a cycling back. But there is, I find, a certain logic to the way I've presented them, that as you have in this course, there's sort of a natural starting point with challenging and expanding our perspectives and recognizing that we've all grown up. I think I can say that safely. We've all been raised in a world that tells us it's one big machine and that we are engineers and mechanics, and we're moving into a more life-aligned worldview. And from there, we can start to imagine that we have a new role, not as engineers and mechanics controlling and predicting, but instead we are stewards or gardeners. We are cultivating the conditions for life to do what it does, right? It's a very different way of showing up and engaging with each other and with the world, with our projects. And as we engage in that, we start to understand more about that life-aligned perspective. And there are methods for being in the practice of stewardship together. And they are uncomfortable at first as we find our way into stewardship. So here, for one example, I remember working with a woman named Belina Raffi, who is a master of applied improvisation. And we would have meetings, and I was still close enough to that corporate background of mine that I would show up to our meetings very well prepared. I had done my homework, and if there was a question we wanted to figure out, I had the answers, and she said to me at one point, Michelle, when you do that, it doesn't leave room for me to come with my answers, and it doesn't leave room for us to discover together. even newer answers that neither of us had thought of before. And I remember how confronted I was by that. I was just like, what do you mean I should come without the answers? It's like coming naked. No, I couldn't even imagine what even is a meeting if you don't come with the answers. But little by little, I practiced and I like tried it out. And I found that I can trust in life. I can trust in these methods of being together. I can trust in myself. So the more we practice these new methods of sharing information, of discovering insights, of making decisions together, and there are so many new methods available and old methods, the more we can settle into that role of stewardship, the more we understand what it means to live a life-aligned worldview. And then we're well equipped to imagine what is actually called for. What are we called to contribute to the world? If we skip straight to that, our answer is likely to be give back more than we take and leave it better than we found it in some very small way. But if we can go through these capacity building kinds of exercises and the work, the practice, then we expand what we understand, what we sense is really needed. And then related to that, we can ask bigger questions than how will we measure it, which is the mechanistic story's favorite question. And instead we can ask, how will we know? How will we know that we are contributing, we're tending to contribute to more aliveness and thriving in the world? It's such a bigger question. So one example of that is a story by another colleague of mine, Bill Reed from Regenesis, who talks about a wastewater treatment plant that he was involved in developing. He's an architect and brings regenerative development to the built environment, to buildings, as a way of healing and regenerating community. So for this wastewater treatment plant, they brought together the community to imagine how could this wastewater treatment plant be a meaningful contribution to the regeneration of our community, and how will we know that it is serving that purpose? And the answer that the community came up with to how will we know is, we will know when the salmon have returned to the waters. The salmon will have returned. And it's, for sure there are metrics we could attach to that, but it's so much more evocative. It holds so much more. It's so much more compelling. I shared that story with a group that was really struggling to find its way. Its contribution just wasn't clear. And when I shared it, they sat forward and somebody said, what is our salmon? We need to know, we need to figure that out. What is our salmon? And my answer was, you need to have that process with the community. It's not for you alone to say. And then once you know what is your salmon, then you can figure out what are some actions we could take, some experiments to be in this learning. And all of that is like these eddying swirls in the river. It just keeps cycling back to deepen your understanding of each of these along the way. So I want to share how I think of that new perspective of a life-aligned worldview. You've seen and heard that I use this word thrivability. And I want to say, even if it's a new word for you, as long as you understand thrive and you understand ability, then you know what this means. This is something human and intuitive. But I will offer a definition to just sort of support our exploration. I think of it as the informed intention and practice of enabling life to thrive. And here, again, I think you have your own definitions of thriving, and I trust that. But here's how I think of thriving, that it's the condition of being able to express unique potential and to generate new possibilities, to regenerate or to heal continuously, to integrate death and renewal. It includes those, and shadow, as Anno said, and to be ever more at home and in harmony with context. So this is the sort of state that we want to cultivate. But it's important to notice, I talk not so much about thriving, but about thrivability, about enabling the ability, life's inherent ability to move towards that state of thriving. if we only talk about thriving, there's a danger that people will say, oh, that's some utopian, far off future. I'm still trying to survive. Don't talk to me about thriving, or I haven't even mastered sustainability yet. How can you expect me to get to thrivability? But that's dangerous and limiting, because we can start to enable life to thrive. We can ask, what would it take to create the conditions for life to thrive more in this conversation, or in your next meeting, or in a project? We can start now to be in the practice of enabling life to thrive. And it is an ongoing individual and collective life practice, like a yoga practice or a martial arts practice or a spiritual practice. I think of it like the practice of deepening in wisdom and compassion, and the ability to sense what's needed and to respond with effective action. And we can always get better at all of those. And the only way to get better at all of those is to engage with life, with other people, in a practice ground, right? That is your project or your organization. That's the point, to become better humans through this practice. I find that it's really important to be clear and set this as our explicit intention, because it's not right now. Our organizations are aligned around such small intentions, not thriving, not enabling life to thrive. And as a result, we're getting something catastrophically less than life's ability to thrive, right? So I find it's important to make it our intention, and then to get informed. What does that mean for us? What does it take to enable life to thrive? And there are many ways to be informed. There's indigenous wisdom, there's your own wisdom and intuition. I looked to biology to get informed about what it takes for life to be able to thrive. So that's what I want to share with you. I'd like to share what I think of as life's universal design principles. This is for fertile conditions that have to be present and cultivated if any living system is to thrive. So I'm going to share them just all at once, all four. I'll go through them really quickly, and then I'll give you an example or two of how they show up, including in everybody's life. All right, you ready? So here they are, really quickly. The first thing we need to know is that all thriving living systems have diverse parts, and the more diverse, the better, the more the system is likely to thrive. Those parts are supported and connected in patterns and structures of relationship and flow in a way that enables the emergence of a new whole, a new level of life with new capabilities and characteristics that we don't find at the level of the parts. And that's the magic we're after in our projects, in our organizations, in our communities, right? That more becomes possible, and that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And what powers that magic, what enables that process, is life. It's whatever spark it is that animates us and makes us alive. Any thriving living system is inherently self-organizing, self-generating, self-regenerating, self-integrating, integrating parts into wholeness, because it is alive. And we're coming to understand that more and more, that we can work with life, right? And we don't have to know what that is, life, where it comes from. We don't have to agree, but we do have to acknowledge it. Otherwise, we stay stuck in that machine story, and we do harm instead of aligning with life. And when we do recognize it, then we more naturally step into that role and stance of stewardship, working with life's inherent tendency. So if we think about, let me offer one example that we all have experienced. I hope we've all experienced. If you've ever had a really inspired conversation, like where you felt so alive and there were so many great ideas, we can design for that. These are design principles. If there are diverse perspectives that you invite in, each of us shows up with different perspectives. And if we have a good rhythm and protocol of taking turns, and we have trust, and our Zoom connection works well enough, we speak the same language, if we design for flow in our patterns and structures of relationship, and if we come together in in wholeness around a question that's really important to all of us and maybe beyond us. Because what brings human systems together in wholeness is shared purpose. So if our shared purpose is some question that we're really passionate about, then we'll bring even more life to this conversation. And if no one tries to coordinate and choreograph and control too much, but we allow ourselves to follow inspiration, right? Follow life, then we will feel enlivened by this conversation. We will come up with amazing ideas that no one showed up with, like in my meetings, right? And we will surprise ourselves with our own brilliance. I hope you've all had that experience where you say something in that kind of a context and you think to yourself, whoa, that was good. Where did I come up with that? You sort of amaze yourself. So that's the feeling that we're after at a really basic level. And it's fractal. It's possible to design for that at all scales. And we see that in soil and in communities and elsewhere. So in human communities, if we think about how that shows up, we might call that passion, how we invite diverse parts to show up. And our question is something like, how can we each share our individual gifts and contributions and be nourished in the process? And I think of that as the practice of inviting divergence. And we might think of that design of relationship as our practice ground and that field of interaction and practice. I think of it actually as practical play also. And our question here could be something like, what will connect and support us in working together with flow and creativity and learning? And here I think about it as the practice of designing for flow. And in what brings us together in wholeness in human contexts is that shared purpose. So here we might ask, what is the potential for wisdom and wholeness and healing that calls us together from the larger system? What is the potential that is calling to us in shared purpose? And here I think of that as sensing convergence. We want the divergence, but in service of a convergent purpose. And where there is life, we might think of that as stewardship. And our question could be, how can we align with and support life's self-organizing emergent process? How can we participate with life or align with life? So here's another way of portraying those design principles. And every metaphor has limitations. It's a necessary oversimplification, but I find it a handy way to imagine that the roots of the tree represent the passion that we bring in, the life that we bring in as divergent parts, as individuals. And we know that trees need a broad and diverse root base to have access to different sources of nutrients, right? And that purpose that brings us together is like the branches and roots, as the branches and leaves and fruit that's our offering up and out into the world, and the invitation to the community to come into this ecosystem and bring life from that part of the system in. And the practice is that space of relationship, like the trunk that connects and supports us and allows life to flow from roots to leaves and leaves to roots. And all of that is tended in a spirit and stance of stewardship, grounded in the story and the context of our place. So this is a way of thinking of that giving field, right? This is the capacity building for the system that we serve, that we're part of. So I want to just touch a little bit more on stewardship and go into some more detail into each of these fertile conditions that have to be cultivated. And then we will get into your project on that basis. So stewardship, again, is how we show up, the stance, the relationship that the way that we engage with each other and with the system. And I like to think of it as the combination of reverence and responsibility. And this is a paradox. Living systems always have many fabulous paradoxes. It invites reverence because every living system has more complexity and more potential than we can ever know and that we can ever control or predict. And so every living system is worthy of our reverence, of our wonder, and our humility as we engage with it, right? And yet, even though it's more than we can comprehend, more than we can control, we feel called to care for it, to respond to its needs, and often with fierceness. So this is a really wonderful dance of humility and fierceness, and also knowing when what's needed is actually just to step back and let life unfold. So this is the core practice of regenerative leadership, of thrivability, being in that dance and tuning in to what is really needed with wisdom and compassion. And I gather practices that help us in that tuning in. And I seem to limit myself to practices that start with the letter C. It's kind of playful, but so far it works. That there's first this care and curiosity, a curiosity that's rooted in humility, that the more we can show up in those ways, the more we are able to align with life. We can have practices of silence and meditation to open ourselves up to the wisdom and other ways of knowing than just the intellect, right? We can spend time in nature. We can spend time in creative activities and be inspired by beauty and art, craft, and imagination. We can tune into the signals of our bodies for guidance about what wisdom and healing and compassion are needed. There's wisdom to be found in rituals like the check-in and the grounding that Laura offered in ceremony. There's guidance to be offered in engaging with life on its own terms, in not being necessarily in such a hurry. The mechanistic story tells us we have to hurry, we have to go fast, we have to be on schedule. And life says it might take time. It might take the time it needs for us to steward the system that we're caring for. We can, even on an intellectual level, explore complexity, come to understand how to engage with complexity, and we can be in generative conversation, including conflict with each other, and maybe even with the more than human world. So I want to reflect, I want to offer you these questions. I think I've talked a little bit too much for us to go into breakouts for this. I want to make sure you have enough time for your project conversation, but just take a moment to think about how you already have this practice of stewardship in your own life. This is a human quality, a human way of showing up, unless we're talked out of it, which we are in our organizations generally. But if you ever had a house plant or a pet or a child or a family or a neighborhood that you care for, even though they have a life of their own, then you have some practice of stewardship. You are capable of caring and tending and responding, and you can get better at it. And there's hope and excitement in engaging with our organizations in that way.